Доброго ранку. А що мене не видно?
Ну, тому що камера, вон там. Камера смотрить в мир.
Камера смотрить в мир, це добре. Вітаю, шановні учасники. Видно, чутно нас? Не чутно.
Гарець щось каже, але не чутно.
Я кажу, що як такий голос президента не почути. Ну, звичайно, що ясно, що чутно.
Пане Олексію,
Пані Дарино, ви нас чуєте?
Чую. Доброго дня.
Доброго ранку.
Доброго дня, раді бачити.
Ми також.
Так, почекайте, це у нас за кордоном, да, і щось там англійською треба буде вякнути, да?
Так, зараз ми, якщо ми формально по тільки ми почнемо, яка в нас година?
Ну, фактично вже починаємо.
Зараз ми перейдемо на англійську мову всі
І
друзі.
це 45 хвилин, да, триватиме?
Скільки витримаємо?
Ні, просто там написано, що, бо в мене іспит зараз іде, тому я питаю.
45 хвилин ми закінчимо.
Окей.
Пане Олексію, вам як, принципово за 45 хвилин вкластися чи як?
Ну, да.
Ну, ми вкладемось тоді.
Ні, ну дивіться, да. Ні, якщо у вас буде ще фуршет, то я можу затриматися.
Пане Олексій, тільки віртуальний, на жаль.
Згодом.
Але потім буде все.
Ну, все тоді. Ви заохотили, так. Ні, я кажу, що у мене просто йде іспит, я взяв перерву на цей час, да, тому ви далі можете продовжувати, але тоді вже без мене.
Тоді в порядку. Ми спочатку... Подожди, хто у нас які підходи?
А скажіть, будь ласка, а я можу показати, поширити екран? Да? Я хочу ж наші чудові графіки, там пару показати.
О, добре.
Зараз...
Можна буде?
Да,
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 спочатку мені треба буде їх знайти, да, а потім я їх покажу.
Ти після свого судового слова ти перебираєш модератора на себе.
Я дав слово Олексію.
Да.
Олексій Васильович Дарина.
Да, да. Ну що, починаємо? Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of Razumkov Center on our today's event. Today we'd like to present a new book published in Palgrave Macmillan Publishing House. This book is named as Euroscepticism and the Future of Europe, Views from the Capitals. This book is a result of joint work of representatives of institutions, think tanks and universities, and members of Trans-European Policy Studies Association, the oldest research network in political science in Europe. There is also a contribution of Ukrainian authors in this book. The book is devoted to analysis of such phenomena as Euroscepticism and to the activity of Eurosceptical political parties in different countries of Europe. Let me introduce you participants of our today's presentations. My colleagues from Razumkov Center, Viktor Zamyatin, Director of Political and Legal Programs, and Alexey Rozumny, leading expert. Ms. Darina Sokolova, our guest speaker, a political expert who works at the Office of Council of Europe in Ukraine. Well-known Ukrainian political scientist, Professor Alexey Gran from Kyiv-Mohyla Academy and Scientific Director of Democratic Initiative Foundation named after Ilko Kucherev. After presentation of the book, which my colleague Viktor Zamyatin will make a bit later, we would like to discuss such questions like are there reasons to speak about the spread of Euroscepticism in Ukrainian society and Ukrainian politics, and how Ukrainian domestic political situation reflects general European trends. And the second question, which place sits the topic of European integration of our country into the activity of Ukrainian political parties, especially during the times of elections. I would like to ask the presenter limit yourself at 10-15 minutes and speakers up to 7 minutes and questions and comments to 3 minutes. We plan to finish our event in 45 minutes up to 12 o'clock by noon. And now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Viktor Zamyatin for the presentation. Please, Viktor.
Thank you, Yuri. Well, My colleague, Mr. Yuri Akimenko, have already presented this book, which is published under the project of Europe for its citizens within the EU framework. And what is this book about? First of all, it's a serious and very interesting attempt to map and analyze the nature and impact of the phenomenon of Euro-skepticism in the different European party systems, and to take note of the new nationalistic tendencies in the European countries. The second issue is that this book is rather a perfect guidebook of the different European countries' party systems, absolutely different internal political situations, and absolutely different society perceptions. I must admit that the editors of this book, who were Dr. Michael Kidding from the University of Duisburg-Essen, Mr. Paul Schmidt from the Austrian Society for European Politics, and Mr. Johannes Pollack from the Webster's Vienna Private University in Vienna, they have made an enormous work. And they have achieved the extremely interesting and useful result. The content of this book is 40 articles concerned on the situation in every European Union member state, in the every Western Balkan countries as candidates for the accession to the EU, in Turkey, in Ukraine, and in Kosovo, as well as in Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. These countries are not neither members or candidates to enter the EU. What can we learn from this book? Well, in the forward, we can find the article of the 40 shades of the Euroscepticism across Europe. Indeed, as I have mentioned before, these 40 shades of Euroscepticism are rather 40 shades of the internal or domestic party system development in every mentioned country. And I'd like to draw your attention to several points. First of all, the phenomenon of Euroscepticism is very long-standing. For instance, in France, it has the history from the very start of the European Union, from the early 50s of the last century. Second, Euroscepticism is playing with different public sentiments and perceptions that are in general based on pessimism and the low public confidence toward the EU institutions, the low citizens' satisfaction with the inefficient politics presented by the EU bodies, and the consequences of these politics. People often appear to consider themselves abandoned by Brussels, and we may compare to our situation where people have very low confidence towards the national government, but very high support to the local self-government bodies. Very often, the Euroscepticism in European countries is fueling the nationalist movements, such as, for instance, the Rassemblement National in France. In fact, Euroscepticism presents both rightist and leftist wings in the European politics. As for the European optimism, we might admit that the only European country that is not the EU member state but the EU candidate is Albania. And this optimism is a result of the citizens' high or rather too high expectations. They really believe in the so-called European utopia, which has a serious danger. At the same time, the situation is completely different in every country. I'd like to mention only some, I think, the most interesting points, such as, for instance, Austria, where the citizens have the assumption that their voice is not heard by the EU officials and EU institutions. The European Union is generally perceived as something far and remote, and public demonstrates a very high level of indifference regarding the so-called European politics. In Poland, in Hungary, we can see the very interesting phenomenon. For in the case of these two countries, we have the Euro-positive societies, but these societies are ruled by the leaders that show the very critical rhetorics toward the EU, and sometimes they can be assessed as the Eurosceptics. Another very different but very interesting case is Turkey. We know that the public support for the country's accession was very high some 10 to 15 years ago. Now the level of this support decreased because the negotiations of the country's accession into the EU have never been opened, while Turkey has a status of the candidate country. In effect, in the Turkey's political scene, there are no explicitly anti-European parties, but very often the country's president, Mr. Erdogan, demonstrates a strong criticism toward the European Union, and Turks themselves, they feel very seriously that the European Union behaves unfair and even unjust toward their country. A very interesting case is Bulgaria. For sometimes we feel very familiar notes. For instance, the Euroscepticism in this country is the result of the anti-establishment and anti-systemic rhetoric of the political parties and their leaders. Really interesting result is Czechia. For in this country, Euroscepticism is omnipresent in the political debates, but none of the political parties can be called itself the Eurosceptic. In Estonia, the right-wing radicalism becomes very popular, and there we see the very high level of the political polarization of the party system. The very interesting case is Latvia. The authors of the chapter on Latvia state that the very common situation in this country is death of the old parties and birth of the new one right before the elections. And this is an unwritten tradition for years in this country. Also, the political parties in Latvia have been efficiently using catch-all and populist methods to attract voters, and This situation was absolutely the same in Ukraine a year ago. So these are the several notes to present the main topics of the stories of the modern political history that are presented in this book. And now I'd like to give floor to my colleague Oleksiy Rozumny, who will present his views of the situation in our country. Please.
Thank you. I have a presentation, some pictures to show. Well, you see that? Yes? Well, I'm going to focus on the results of a survey conducted by the Razumkov Center in November 2020. It points to the strong support for European integration and also illustrates some features of Euro-skepticism in Ukraine. The survey was conducted in all regions of Ukraine except the Crimea and the occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. 20,020 adult respondents were interviewed. Well, in November 2020, the majority of respondents, 55%, believed that Ukraine should join the European Union, while 31% of respondents expected the opposite opinion. Expressed the opposite opinion. The results of the survey differ little from the previous one conducted in March 2015, but compared to the 2008 and 2013, the camp of supporters of European integration has strengthened somewhat. At the same time, a decrease in the share of respondents who could not decide on the answer may indicate the polarization of opposite positions, which is not a good signal. I would also like to draw your attention to the fact that regional and electoral differences remain strong. For example, based on the views of the electorate, the opposition platform for life can be confidently considered a party of Eurosceptics. In general, citizens assess the pace of Ukraine's integration into the EU rather low. 44% of respondents believe that the pace is low, 23% call the pace of European integration medium, and 21% do not see progress in this at all. At the same time, opponents of Ukraine's accession to the EU estimate the pace of integration much lower than supporters. This probably indicates disappointment and skepticism about progress towards European integration as a more important reason not to support EU accession than fear of the negative consequence of such a move. Also, among the reasons that hinder Ukraine's integration into the EU, respondents most often marks the high level of corruption, as well as the low level of economic development and insufficient pace of reforms in Ukraine. At the same time, opponents of Ukraine's accession to the EU are much more likely to mark the EU's unwillingness to integrate Ukraine and differences in cultural development, while supporters of EU accession often marks a hybrid war between Ukraine and Russia and the EU's reluctance to the conflict with Russia. This data confirm that Euroscepticism in Ukraine is connected with the thesis that Ukraine is not needed by European Union, while the Russian threat strengthens the desire of Ukrainians to integrate into the EU. So we can conclude that the clear European Union's interest in Ukraine will make support for the European integration course within the country even higher, while the lack of progress over time may lead to frustration and heightened Eurosceptic sentiment among Ukrainian citizens. That's all. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexei. And as we see well that the conclusions made by Alexei are completely the same that were made the authors of these 40 articles on the Euroscepticism in the Europe. And now I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Harang, who also has his presentation. Please, Alexei.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be here together with the Razumkov Center, who are we are partners since a long time. And I would like to mention to the audience that in 2004, we conducted the exit poll together, which showed the falsifications which were during the presidential elections of 2004. And actually this exit poll was one of the reasons for the Orange Revolution. So this is a very interesting thing. No, that's right, you know, because everybody was referring to this exit poll, which showed totally different result, which showed actually the victory of Viktor Yushchenko, who was pro-European. Well, if you would like to commenting on this book, I think this is a great idea to have this comparison and analyze different stories. Actually, I have prepared a presentation on Ukraine, but because Alexei Razumny said something about what's going on in the public attitudes of Ukrainians, I would like to generalize the situation somehow. And look, now we hear a lot about the collapse of European integration. We have these public moods. We have Brexit and many other complicated stories. And actually, this is used to discredit the European Union in Ukraine as well. Look, you are going to join the European Union, but what's going on with the European Union? And in this situation, you are going to join NATO, but we don't know what kind of NATO it would be. And I would like to draw, because I am an old guy already, so I remember the years of when I was a student of international relations, the end of 70s, beginning of 80s. And remember that at that time, so many people in Europe believed in so-called Soviet peace initiatives. There were anti-war, anti-American marches and rallies in many European capitals, which were joined not only by socialists or social democrats, but also by liberals, by a lot of political spectrum, and they were against the United States and in favor of Soviet peace initiatives. And at that time also, there was a very strong left populist movement, you know, communists who were almost in power, actually. They joined, they shared the responsibility in France, in Spain, in Portugal, and even in Italy, you know, they were on the verge of joining the ruling system at that time, the so-called Eurocommunism. So at that time, again, there were a lot of left populist ideas, and there were a lot of talks that EU and NATO in future would collapse, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So if we analyze right now the recent elections to the European Parliament, then you see that the far right, they increased Eurosceptics, they increased their representation in the European Parliament, but basically the main forces remain the same. Social Democrats, European People's Party, and also the Alliance of Liberals. These are the strongest factions in the European Party, so in the European Parliament. So again, there is a threat of Euroscepticism. They increased, they strengthened their positions, but nevertheless, there is also a possibility for mainstream parties to continue pro-European and course, and to continue transatlantic cooperation. In this regard, I would like also to move now to Ukraine. And is it possible to share my screen right now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, you see it?
Yes, we see it.
Yes, you see it. Okay. Let me. Oops, остановлено. Okay. I made a mistake. I think I made a mistake. Let me try again. Sorry about that. Okay. So if you see this slide, you see that before Euromaidan, Ukrainians believed actually that they may be part of the European Union, and at the same time they can be in the customs union with Russia and other CIS countries, which is impossible. But this is so-called Ukrainian geopolitical ambivalence. And you see that after that, you have basically stable support for joining the EU, but at the same time, the idea to join Eurasian Union, customs union with Russia, totally collapsed. So basically now it's the recent poll gave about 13%. So definitely there is a regional, there are regional differences, and it was in the presentation of the Razumkov Center, but nevertheless, you know, Ukrainians in these difficult times, they still believe in the European Union and the European integration. This is very important. And the striking event was about, you know, attitudes to joining NATO, because the supporters of NATO, they were always in minority. And after the start of Russian aggression, support for NATO skyrocketed. So this is very important, because in the elections of 2019, this was a triumph of populism, because definitely, you know, Ukraine was in difficult situation in time of war, of economic recession, and Zelensky won on the slogans of populist slogans. But at the same time, the victory of Zelensky, it wasn't based on anti-European slogans. And again, in the presentation of the Razumkov Center, you saw that supporters of NATO and the EU are actually the majority in the electorate of the servant of the people of Zelensky party. So this is very interesting, that they are populist, this is a populist party, but at the same time, majority of supporters of Zelensky. They still believe in European integration and NATO. So in this sense, I can say that actually Ukrainians now can send a message to the European countries: don't give up. We believe in you. We believe in European integration. So this is on the positive side. And on the negative side, definitely, you know, we have a team which came to power again on populist slogans. They are not professionals. They're doing a lot of mistakes. And actually, what is important now is that President Zelensky, who was promising the totally new politics, totally new faces, non-corrupt, honest guys, actually he is returning to the schemes of the classical Ukrainian and not only Ukrainian politics. So this is a challenge. This is a challenge for the country, because we have high promises, high expectations, and now they are falling down because the populist government cannot perform it. And definitely it can be reflected in the foreign policy orientations. But at the same time, as I have said, and I would like to reiterate this thesis, that Ukrainians still believe in European integration and NATO. And this is important, and based on that, we can continue to build our European and Atlantic aspirations. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Alexei, for your very interesting presentation. And yes, I think we should agree with you that we can and we have to send this message to our European colleagues. And of course, we should do our best to give this message received properly. And now I'd like to give floor to Ms. Darina Sokolova, who represents the Kyiv office of the Council of Europe. Please, Darina.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I would like to talk about responding to the populist threat and preventing it in future. We all agree that populists often enjoy broad support because they are responding to voters' real and legitimate grievances. And indeed, among the most pressing challenges of concern for the European democracies are the issues of alienation of the people from political processes, lack of public confidence in democratic institutions, and decorrelation between citizens' preferences and decisions made by public authorities. Such challenges should be urgently addressed, as citizens who have no voice in political discussions and decision-making will more likely challenge them, vote, as we see, for populists or Eurosceptics, and their trust in public authorities will be low. The practice of the representative system demonstrates that the change of political actors does not always improve the situation, or sometimes makes it even worse, right? If the good functioning of the system itself is at stake. So citizens must have equal rights and opportunities to express their opinions in the course of decision-making process and implementation of important policies, which have an impact on their lives. And everybody's voice must be heard, taken into account, including the voices of seldom heard people. Here I'm talking about young people, vulnerable, marginalized groups of people. So ensuring equal and favorable opportunities for citizens to participate is one of the best ways to address most problems that our democracies face. The best democratic governance usually takes place when citizens are more active, bridging thus the gap between the civil society and authorities. So what can be done to tackle populism and Euroscepticism? It is crucial to understand that the answer to the frustration we see in many of our societies, both European, Western European, and in Ukraine, is not populism. It is about renewing our institutions so that they better represent and serve our citizens. Both in Ukraine and abroad, people have lost trust in state institutions. And here, using the unbelievable potential of citizens, NGOs, civil societies, and making civil participation the basis of the renewed democratic systems is the key element. According to the latest USAID Engaged National Civic Engagement Poll, only 7% of Ukrainians are regularly engaged in their local community life. And the share of those who have experience with at least one type of civic engagement mechanism during the last 12 months constitutes 22%. Numbers that are not very positive, frankly speaking. So, in my opinion, there are some main elements in the fight against populism, and these are both short-term and long-term solutions that we need to implement. So first of all, strengthening the capacity of stakeholders in participatory decision-making. Here I'm talking both about public officials, citizens, NGOs, how to do it, through advocacy schools, through mentoring programs, through trainings, because the most important is to understand that mechanism to participate in decision-making, they are present, both in Ukraine and abroad. But the problem is that they are not widely used, that people do not them use widely, and they would like to vote for populists or Eurosceptics, but like this, they think they will find solutions to their problems, but it's not true. Second point is creating effective civil participation mechanism at the local level. So enhancing local regulatory frameworks for civil participation mechanisms. I'm talking about charters of amalgamated communities, about different regulatory frameworks for citizens' meetings, public hearings, public consultations, e-petitions. Once more, it's quite important that citizens use this mechanism because they are present and they can change their local agenda, even national agenda, by participating in decision-making process. They just have to know how to do it. Third point is implementing innovative approaches and mechanisms to involve citizens in decision-making process. It's quite important during coronavirus when now decision-making at local, regional, and national levels need also online mechanisms. We believe, and the Council of Europe project I'm working in believes that it's important to implement this mechanism and to involve people who are seldom heard in decision-making, and public authorities and civil society to work together on decisions and their implementation. And we have mechanism for this. And the last but not the least element is ensuring better political participation of young women and men and their increased capacity in civic activism to influence positive changes. We all know that young people are not very well engaged in politics, in decision-making. So it's crucial to ensure their willingness and ability to participate in politics. And it will support this belief among young people that their action matters and they can have a meaningful impact. And it's not by voting for populists and Eurosceptics that they can change something, but by being involved from the very beginning in different elements of decision-making and in politics. Therefore, I believe that strengthening participation of citizens and ensuring mechanisms for this is of vital importance for the functioning of today's democracies, and it increases public supervision of authorities and ensures that the latter act in public interest. And in my opinion, it's the only way we can tackle populism in short and long term. Thank you so much.
Thank you really very much, Narina, for, well, I have to say that your remarks they really withstand with our position, and we have just completed another project on the civic education as of the high priority of the state policy. And you see that, of course, we really value very high the necessity for civic participation, for the people's involvement into the process. And so, yes, it is a solution, as you said, in the short and the long term. Thank you. And now I'd like to give floor to Dr. Yakimenko, who will first present our contribution to this book, and second will finalize our discussion. Please, Yuri.
Thank you, Victor. Let me turn back a bit to the book itself, and especially to our, with Victor's contribution to this book, that we gave the name Ukraine, the Progress of Europopulism in Postmodern Age. It is about the story of Ukrainian party system and the changes in this system during 2014-2019, and especially on the role of populism and Europopulism played in destruction of joint pro-European majority in the parliament. Let me remind you that after the elections of 2014, among 7 political parties that overcome the electoral threshold to Verkhovna Rada, 6 were pro-European, and they entered the joint pro-European coalition. But by the end of the term of this parliament, only 2 members remained in the coalition, while the rest left the coalition in different years. And the main reason was not a disappointment in European values or in disappointment in European course, but feeling that among voters there are some things like tiredness from European reforms and so on and so forth. And because of that, those parties who left the coalition, they just didn't want to share responsibility for those unpopular but pro-European reforms within the country. So because of some populist elements in their rhetorics and their expectations for participation in the future election, those pro-European coalitions that really did a lot in providing reforms in different spheres and the fulfillment of the agenda of association agreement, this coalition remains a minority, in fact, and this gives the possibility newly elected presidents and his political force to dismiss this parliament and to appoint new elections and win the single-party majority, again, of the populist political party Sluga Naroda, while populist, because it's a party without ideology. It's a party that combines different pickup of different supporters, catch-all political party that from the one hand declares European integration, on the other hand, we can see in the faction of those parties the people who openly speaks from anti-Western position, anti-European position, and so on and so forth. How to combine it? It's one head, it's some mental disease. It's called like that. But we will proceed with that. Then, in fact, the populism, despite some of the political forces still called themselves as pro-European, it killed the pro-European coalition in Verkhovna Rada, in fact. And now, if we take practical results of those politics, we have some reforms has been stopped, some reforms has been reshaped in a not understandable well shape, and so on. And the most represented in the parliament and the openly articulated pro-European political party in the parliament, European Solidarity of Ukraine, is in opposition. And on the other flank, it's very vivid example, there is a pro-Russian political party, Oppositional Platform for Life. So now pro-European parties are in direct opposition to the party of power in Ukraine. It doesn't mean that Eurosceptical or anti-European parties succeed in Ukraine. because, as Professor Garan said, that I completely support his topic, that majority of Ukrainians still supports the idea of Ukrainian accession to the EU, more than 65% if we take results of the poll of November 2019, while the opponents are in minority, only 24%. And I think situation with support of pro-Russian political forces, pro-Russian, I mean anti-European and anti-Western political forces, can grow significantly under the conditions of hybrid or not hybrid or open war with Russia. But Ukrainian society is really vulnerable to populism, as Darina completely rightly said, and gives the populist political forces possibility to play on very different sentiments, on situative moods in society, on the lack of trust in governmental institutions, on their non-participation into a representative institution, and so on. And the local elections openly shows that among the local political parties, regional political parties, we could observe those that while trying to avoid openly pro-Russian characters, they trying to promote anti-Western, anti-European values, and somehow under the shade of post-Soviet sentiments and so on. And under present conditions, if we have such a mess with state politics of reforms, on one hand we hear pro-European slogans and pro-NATO slogans and so on. On the other hand, there are no real deeds in that. So situation in Ukraine is looking very interesting and not predictable enough. While pro-European trend in Ukrainian politics remains mainstream, but the real constellation of political forces can change, and sometimes very rapidly. And Euroscepticism, not in a direct sense, because we don't have an experience living in European Union or under conditions of close to life in European Union, but disappointment and element of some kind of tiredness or just hesitation, again, turning back to hesitation between one and another type of values, can influence the political situation in Ukraine, and populist rhetorics also can do the same. So we, from one hand, we can expect the further changes in the party system, but I hope, and I don't think that bearers of pro-European values and pro-European orientation will be a real minority, not only formal minority like it's the parliament, but among population, the idea of European integration of Ukraine will have a strong support. And finalizing, I would like to thank all of participants of today's discussion, today's our speakers. And of course, I'd like to thanks a lot to TEPSA and to all who contributed to this book, to the authors, to editors of this book. And I can recommend it to Ukrainian politicians, not only Ukrainian, but we are in Ukraine. So to Ukrainian politicians, political scientists, public activists, political experts, students, and to broad audience who are interested in what is happening in Ukraine and what expect our country with its European future. Thank you for your attention.
So, thank you, Yuri. Thank you for your presentation and for your concluding remarks. Thank you, dear friends, for attending our event, to have got your presentation. And
May I have a joke? A joke.
Yes, please.
You know, on the eve of the new year, that we are saying in Ukraine that there is a good omen if you are sitting between people with same names. And one of the presenters was Alexei Razumny, right?
Exactly.
Okay, the other is Alexei Garant. So I saw on the screen that actually Darina was sitting between two Alexeis. But because we are in virtual space, so basically everybody who joins this Zoom, they may consider that they were sitting between two Alexeis. So now you can have your own desire, your own wish, which will definitely come true. Either about European integration, fighting populism, or something personal. So thank you.
Thank you, Alexei.
Thank you, Alexei.
Both
So,
Alexei.
so both let us our desires come true, even this year, and of course the next year. All the best wishes to you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.